Now, for the next in a special series on free speech with the Oxford academic and author on the subject, Timothy Garton Ash. He examines the tricky lines to draw between free speech and religion.
This is the music played at the funeral of one of the cartoonists of the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, who were murdered by Islamist extremists in Paris last year. They were killed simply because they'd published cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. Here's an example of what I call the assassin's veto. Publish that, and we will kill you. As these assassins left the building, they shouted, "We've avenged the Prophet." The tension between religion and free speech is one of the most acute in our time. Of course, it's quite wrong to identify all Muslims with such violence. One of the most moving scenes I saw in the days after the Charlie Hebdo attacks was a group of French imams on a street corner in Paris singing the Marseillaise. But it's equally absurd to say that all this has nothing to do with religion. Even if we put aside such extremes of terror perpetrated in the name of faith, there's still a palpable tension. Christians complain that their views are not fully respected in secular Britain. Some even say the BBC is infused with a kind of metropolitan atheism. Meanwhile, atheists feel they're not fully accepted in the famously religious United States. How can we reconcile people's deeply held belief in absolute revealed truths with the vital post-Enlightenment freedom to question all beliefs? After debating this at length with believers in many faiths and none, the principle I propose is this: we respect the believer, but not necessarily the content of the belief. The vital distinction here is between two different kinds of respect. The philosopher Stephen Darwall calls them recognition respect and appraisal respect. Put simply, recognition respect, as in we respect the believer, is the respect that I owe you because you're a fellow human being, endowed with the same inherent dignity as me. That respect is unconditional. Appraisal respect, by contrast, has to be earned. Many believers instinctively find this principle hard to accept. Here's Dr. Abdullah Sahin, a senior lecturer in Islamic studies at the Markfield Institute of Higher Education in Leicester.
Yeah, fundamentally, I think when people say, particularly the secular liberal position, that we sort of respect you as a person, but we are not prepared to acknowledge, recognize your faith, I think there's a kind of an undignified, condescending attitude where really my religion is merely tolerated. And I think this is fundamentally is really not right. If you are going to respect me, I appreciate that, of course, you should be able to acknowledge and recognize what I represent. After all, I'm making a claim to be a Muslim, and the way, of course, I really practice my Islam is really difficult to separate from me as a person. And then therefore, it should not be a mere toleration of my faith, but it should be really a genuine recognition and respect for my faith.
So the message seems to be, respect me, respect my faith. But if by respect one means not challenged, not exposed to critical scrutiny, then that's to proclaim a vast no-go area. Religion does not exist in a separate world of its own. Yes, there's a realm of purely private belief or mystical experience which rational scientific argument can't contest. Either you believe or you don't. But religions also make claims about human nature, the character of our world, about how lives should be led and societies organized. And these claims do overlap with the territories of science, history, and politics. In 2007, for example, on BBC Radio 4...
It's 6:10. A College of Education that trains teachers says they should take creationism seriously. Our education correspondent...
This was reported as a call to respect the growing number of Christian and Muslim children whose families do not believe in evolution. That's a direct challenge to science. The dilemma is especially acute in a multicultural society like Britain, where people of every faith live side by side. If you were to put together all the taboos of all the religions in the world, there would be precious little left for us to talk about. And where do we draw the line to say, that's religion, but that's not? Suppose I founded the Church of the High Fivers, its central tenet being that 2 + 2 = 5. Ridiculous, you may shout at the radio. But is that really so much more irrational than the claims of, say, Scientology, the religion of Tom Cruise?
Stand up!
Acknowledge it as loudly as you can.
Thank you!
Command it as loudly as you can.
Former Scientologists recreate one of its religious tests for the BBC Panorama programme. It involves shouting at an ashtray on a chair.
Well, I fell down.
Sit down on that chair!
Good. Acknowledge it as loudly as you can.
Thank you.
Good.
Are we really supposed to take this seriously, to treat it with respect? So in an open society, we do have to make the distinction between recognition respect for the believer and appraisal respect for the content of the belief. This doesn't mean that anything goes. On the contrary, we should think carefully about how we address the things that our neighbours hold sacred. My own view, after examining the track record of laws relating to free speech and religion in many countries, is that the state is best advised not to set limits to this argument by law. What the state should do, however, is to shape the character of the public sphere. Broadly speaking, there are 3 possibilities. You can allow only one god in the public square, as in Saudi Arabia. You can allow no gods at all in the public square, as in North Korea, or you can allow all gods to try their luck in the public square. The only one of these compatible with free speech is the last, a public sphere organized to permit people of all faiths and none to practice, preach, and proselytize. Now, anyone who's attended a formal service in a great cathedral knows that religion draws powerfully on the emotional appeal of art, music, architecture, the glorious language of the King James Bible. Atheists must therefore be free to draw on their own artistic repertoire, including polemic, caricature, and satire. A fine example of how both sides can live with this, given mutual tolerance and a certain generosity of spirit, is the musical called The Book of Mormon.
My family and friends all said I was blessed. So what happened?
This satirical musical was staged with great success on both sides of the Atlantic. Hillary Clinton attended a performance. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints reacted calmly, with a statement saying,
"The production may attempt to entertain audiences for the evening, but the Book of Mormon as a volume of scripture will change people's lives forever by bringing them closer to Christ."
What's so scary about that? I must trust that my Lord...
I must admit that I have zero appraisal respect for the content of Mormon scripture, but I do respect that calm, mature reaction to a piece of musical theatre. You can bet your life that a musical called The Book of Muhammad will not be coming to a theatre near you any time soon. Indeed, you would be betting your life if you tried to put it on. But some years ago, the BBC did televise another musical.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Jerry Springer Show.
Jerry Springer, the opera, in which a Jesus Christ figure appears as a flabby grown-up dressed only in a baby's nappy. In an interview for our Oxford University website on free speech, I discussed this with Mark Thompson, then Director General of the BBC. He stressed that he speaks as a practicing Catholic who is personally sensitive to the mockery of religious images.
Jerry Springer, I saw without feeling that it was offensive to me. A particular Christian movement, quite a small movement, mounted a campaign. I could look out of my office window and see people burning their licence fees outside the front door of the BBC. So it was clear there was quite a few people were unhappy with the idea we should broadcast.
But it is the case, isn't it, that the BBC wouldn't dream of broadcasting something comparably satirical if it had been the Prophet Muhammad rather than Jesus?
I mean, I think essentially the answer to that question is yes.
That's yes, the BBC would not have broadcast it. When the Daily Mail picked this up in an article, 1D Acres of Ball's Cross, West Sussex, wrote in its online comment section,
This man,
that is Mark Thompson,
is disgusting. He should be taken out and put up on a cross. That would teach him not to disrespect this country and its Christian faith.
intolerance is not a Muslim monopoly.
Oh, Cinnamon, where you gonna run to? Cinnamon, where you gonna run to?
In an open, tolerant society, we must be free to air our fundamental differences and challenge each other's beliefs, even if some people find this offensive or insulting. Free by law and free from the threat of violence. But of course it doesn't follow that we should go around insulting each other all the time. A right to offend does not imply a duty to offend. We can choose how we speak or don't speak and how we listen when it comes to things that our neighbours hold most dear. And we can ask what approach is most likely to open up a conversation rather than closing it down. When I talked some more with Abdullah Sahin, the lecturer in Islamic studies, it became clear that what he was really asking was to be listened to and taken seriously. Far from advocating an uncritical, multiculturalist, you do it your way, we do it ours, he actually feels that young Muslims have not been challenged enough.
If you think of the 80s and 90s, we have this multiculturalism, for example, in Britain, where literally being nice to one another is simply the only thing that people are doing. But people were not able to raise critical questions about each other. So as someone who has spent a decade to study Muslim young people in Britain, I felt that that kind of naive, anything goes and really liberal sort of framework or story wasn't doing really the right constructive way forward. And therefore, of course, decades have passed. Political reality has changed. And unfortunately, we haven't developed new languages of using our own faith and value traditions to be able to taking each other very seriously and being able to genuinely listening to one another and then finding logics, values and rationale from our own traditions to be able to relate to one another.
This emphasis on how you listen is something that goes all the way back to the famous edicts of Ashoka, the 3rd century BC Indian emperor, which are among the earliest surviving texts promoting religious coexistence. But we must also be free to engage in frontal criticism of the content of religious beliefs and to propagate our own. My argument invites a final objection. Aren't liberals like me ultimately placing our own belief, the belief in tolerance, above all others? In a sense, yes. But the path of tolerance is not merely yet another one true way. It's the only one whose purpose is to enable everyone to live out a multiplicity of other true ways. This requires a difficult balance between an unconditional respect for the believer and what may be a total lack of respect for the content of the belief. If that's a compromise, it's a compromise in the defense of which we must be uncompromising.
That was Respect Me, Respect My Religion by Timothy Garton Ash. The producer was Nina Robinson.